Like for me, I always loved the summer when I was growing up. I mean, it's still cool now, but it's like I live in Florida, and I'm a grown man, so every day can be the summer if I wanted to. But when it was summertime, it basically said it was adventure time. So all of a sudden, I went from hey fishing in the afternoon after school to I can fish all day long if I want to because I don't have any homework. Or I'd go to the mountains, or I'd go climb waterfalls, or I'd go camping. Like it was just always an adventure time. Yes, dude, climbing waterfalls is so much fun, especially if you go with somebody who doesn't know what they're doing because they slip. As long as they don't die, it's hilarious. But anyway, so I had this friend that would always go with me. His name was Steven, right? And he's like a 6'4", like Caucasian guy. It's like he called himself a redneck. We were brothers from another mother. People literally thought, like, if you heard us on the phone, you think it's the same person because we talked the exact same way. We had the same stories. It was absolutely awesome. He loved fishing. He loved Jesus. He loved Sour Patch. He loved sweet tea. I love the same things. We were just like, we were made to be friends. That's what it was. Right, so but everything that I did when it came to adventure time, he did the same thing. So when I was going hiking in the mountains, we came along. Like there's times we saw black bears in the mountains, but I was like, you know what, it's cool. Got my bro here with me. We've gone to I think like 4 or 5 countries together. We've been to like Botswana, South Africa. We've been to Peru, and we've been to Namibia together. We've been to a lot of places together. We had a lot of fun times together. We did a lot of it wasn't dumb. But it wasn't the smartest, semi-dangerous. There's a lot of semi-dangerous things that parents would probably say, no, is that advisable? We did those things together because my thought was, you know what, like, hey, if I break a bone, he can drag me out. He's strong enough, and at least he can call 911. At least he knows that. Or, like, if he broke something, I would carry him and try and drag him out also, but he was bigger than me. Like, we knew that in pretty much 99.98% of the situations, because you know that, like, 0.02 could be crazy. In most situations, we had each other's backs. Because we had each other's backs, we were able to do things that we normally wouldn't do if we were by ourselves, right? How many of y'all have like that one friend that you know no matter what's happening in your life, they'll have your back, like through thick and thin, yeah? It's nice having that one person in your life, right? But here's a question for you. What happens in your life, or how do you respond, or do you respond differently if that person isn't around? Like if you were to say, okay, you know what, I'm a pretty bold person when Steven is around, but when I graduated college and he was still in school, and I moved out and started basically working and doing different things, did my lifestyle, my actions change? Was I less adventurous because I didn't have my brother from another mother that was walking with me? Well, it did, and it kind of didn't at the same time. And I wonder for you all, and for most people, would our lifestyles change if the person who we know absolutely always has our back isn't around? Have you ever thought about that? Tonight we're going to talk about what that looks like in our life. We're going to talk about, is it good or is it bad for our lifestyle to change? Because, I mean, it's nice to be able to have someone who you can say, no matter what happens, this person's going to be there for me. They know exactly what medication I need. They know my favorite order from like Chick-fil-A. They know exactly what I need. But what happens to us when we say, okay, you know what? I'm all alone. And would you live differently? Would you act differently if you knew that nobody had your back when you go out and do things that might be a little risky? Well, today we're going to talk about a story where someone might have did that. He made a choice, and he didn't really have anybody to have his back, but he made a choice. And we're going to talk about the byproducts, the things that he didn't even, like years later. He had no idea any of this stuff was going to happen. The things that happened in his life because of the choice that he made. Sound good? So we're going to continue in Esther. We'll answer questions later on. We'll continue in Esther. So if you have your Bibles, go ahead and turn to Esther chapter 6, starting in verse 1. Ready? Let the games begin. On that night, the king could not sleep, and he gave orders to bring the book of memorable deeds and the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. Now, some of y'all might ask, what's that night? What happened? Well, what had happened was last time we talked about Esther, basically saying, all right, look, have all the Jewish people do a fast. Now, remember, they were already fasting, so it's not like it was a big deal, but she said, have a do fast for 3 days. Don't have them eat any food. Don't drink any water. And she said, after these 3 days, I'm going to go to the king, and if I die, I die. Why was she going to the king? Because she was going to intercede on behalf of the Jewish people and say, hey, look, don't kill all of them, please. I mean, like, they're important. I'm a Jewish person. Please don't do it. So 3 days have passed by. The 4th day comes. She goes to the king. The king sees her, and Xerxes is just like, yeah, that's my beautiful wife. And he extends the golden scepter to her, and he says, what is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? In fact, ladies, get y'all a man like this. He said, whatever you want, even if it's half my kingdom, it's yours. Just request it. And so her response in the midst of this, like, it's like getting a blank check from a king. Her response was, I'd love for you to come to dinner with me and bring this guy along. Would you rather have the kingdom or the dinner? Like, the kingdom? Well, wait, the dinner could be delicious, though. It could be a great dinner, but then again, she made it, so, I mean, like, she knew what was going to happen. So she makes this meal, right? She probably didn't make it. She had her friends or her servants make it. Has a meal, and she brings Haman along. You guys might ask, who is Haman? Haman's that guy who basically wanted to kill off all the Jewish people. He was very upset because somebody wouldn't bow down to him. Number 2 guy in the entire Persian nation. So that's who Haman is. So Haman comes to the meal when it's just King Xerxes and Queen Esther, and Haman's there, and Haman's just like, all right, cool. Things are going great. Life is really good. And so now this day basically ends, and we have Xerxes who's trying to go to bed. So that's where our scene opens. We continue on. And it was found written how Mordecai had told about Bigthana and Teresh, I can't talk, 2 of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold and who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And the king said, what honor or distinction has been bestowed on Mordecai for this? The king's young men who attended him said, nothing has been done for him. So let's talk about really quick what happened. So 5 years ago, we're in, I think it's like his 9th. We're in his 9th year. So we're in the 9th year, basically King Ahasuerus or King Xerxes and Queen Esther being together. So 5 years back, Mordecai is just doing what he does. Remember, he used to always go to the king's gate, or basically the little area, and he would just sit there, and he would ask the eunuchs, like, hey, how's Esther doing, or Queen Esther doing? Like, everything is good? Okay, cool. And he happened to overhear a little conversation because Mordecai, I guess, is just like a commoner. Nobody really thinks anything of him. But he overhears a conversation between 2 of the king's eunuchs, and these guys are like, hey, you know what? We want to assassinate the king. And so Mordecai, in his wisdom, is just like, interesting. And he goes and tells the queen's eunuchs. And so the queen's eunuchs basically go and tell Queen Esther. Queen Esther goes and investigates and finds out, oh, snap, these people are really trying to kill my husband. And so King Xerxes finds out about it, and you know what he does? He has those people, they were hanged. Yes, they're dead. They're gone 5 years ago. So that's what happened, right? And so King's like, oh, yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that guy's awesome. What did I do for him? You know, did we buy him something, get him a pony? What was it? What happened? And they're like, yeah, you didn't really do anything. So how does the king respond? Well, here's his response. And the king said, who is in the court right now? Which basically means, like, which one of my royal officials, one of those guys who I get advice from? Remember that one time you got advice from the guys and they said, hey, you should just make a law that says that your wife can't enter your presence anymore? Remember how that went for him? 4 years, no wife? Rough. He said, hey, who's in the court? Now Haman. Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged. Haman just has it out for Mordecai on the gallows that he had made or prepared for him. And the king's young men told him, Haman is there, standing in the court. And the king said, let him come in. So Haman came in, and the king said to him, what should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor? And Haman said to himself, well, whom would the king delight to honor more than me? Now, you might say to yourself, why would Haman think that? Well, you got to remember some things. First of all, Haman became the number 2 guy in the entire Persian Empire right after Queen Esther came into power, right? And Haman also made that promise that he'd give over $190 million in this current right here, like our current economy, $190 million in silver to the king's treasury if the king would allow him to get rid of this unruly people group. Because he said the Jewish people, you know, well, he actually didn't tell the king that they were Jews. He just said they have laws that don't really coincide with your laws. They really don't follow your practices. It's just be better to get rid of them. Plus, I'm going to give you a lot of money to take care of it. And the king's just like, go for it. So in Haman's eyes, he's like, hey, I also went to a private lunch or dinner, whatever the meal was, private meal with the king and the queen. So the king's got to be talking about me, right? So what do I want from the king? Because think about this. If you're giving away $190 million in silver, you probably have some wealth, right? A little bit. So he's thinking to himself, all right, what could I get from the king? So he starts to ponder, starts thinking of ideas. Let's see what the ideas are. And Haman said to the king, for the man whom the king delights to honor, and remember, he's thinking about, like, this has got to be me. For the man whom the king delights to honor, let the royal robes be brought. I can't say robes, it seems. Which the king has worn, and the horse that the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown is set, and let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. Let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and let them lead him on the horse through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. So Haman lays out, we won't call him stupid, just malinformed. Haman lays out this elaborate scheme. He says, you know what? And here, let's just be honest with what he says. He's like, I want the king's horse, one of the king's horses. Because if the king rides on the horse, the only person who's supposed to ride on the horse other than the king is the next king. Like, that old king is dead and gone. The new king has come. Like, that's how it is. So it's a serious honor to ride on the king's horse. Or it's a serious mistake to ride on his horse, because you do that and you are done, okay? So he asked for the king's horse for this person. He also asked for the robe that the king's worn. So you want the king's horse. You want his clothes. What else do you want? Oh, he wants a crown on his head. Okay. And to make it even that much better, you know how processions go, where basically they'll have a royal figure riding on a horse, or they're being carried on someone's shoulders, and they have somebody from the court, royal court, basically saying, hear ye, here comes the king or the queen or whoever it is. That's what Haman says. That's what I want for myself. He's basically saying, I want to be you, without saying it, right? Of course, because he would never say that to the king. He's like, I want to have all the elaborate things, all the things that people know you for. I want all that bestowed on me. And I want to be paraded around. I want people to look at me and say, oh, look at this guy. He's awesome. He's fantastic. So King Xerxes, Ahasuerus, says, okay. Then the king said to Haman, hurry. Take the robes and the horse, as you have said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew. And I'm sure at that moment Haman was just like, wait, hold on a second now, man. I actually came to talk to you about killing that guy. You sure you want to do this? Well, I'm sure he didn't say that, because the story went in a lot quicker than it does. Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate, leave out nothing that you have mentioned. So Haman took the robes and the horse, and he dressed Mordecai. Can you imagine dressing the person you want to kill, like in royal clothes, and putting him up on like a beautiful stallion and parading him around? He probably was great. I can't grip my teeth right now, but he's probably gritting his teeth and just frustrated. I just imagine the thoughts going through Haman's mind as he realizes, this Mordecai. Okay. And he dressed Mordecai and led him through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done to whom the king delights to honor. Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house, mourning and with his head covered. I'm so sad for Haman. He's got a rough life, doesn't he? Like, he's just trying to do great things for the kingdom, and this one Jewish guy won't bow down to him, and it's just like, because you won't bow down to me, I'm going to genocide an entire people group, and I'm going to give a lot of money to it. And then the one guy he's trying to take care of, the king's just like, hey, you know what? Let's honor this guy. And Haman's like, oh, come on, man. Like, just anybody else? One guy. Okay, so how does Haman respond to all that just took place? Well, he ran home, sad, covered his head. Like, he was in a pretty bad mood. How did Mordecai respond? And I actually didn't catch this the first 3 times I read this, but I just noticed when I was writing it out earlier. Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate. Mordecai went right back to where he started. After getting this robe and getting the horse to ride on and getting all these things, Mordecai went right back to his normal day, everyday life. What was so special about Mordecai? No. You probably know the answer, okay? Just let me finish the sermon, all right? And try not to stutter. What was so special about Mordecai, though? Like, why was it? Because this is a question that probably Haman's potentially thinking by now. I mean, he's dead now. It's a lot years ago, but he's thinking, why is it that this guy is so hard to kill? Why? Why? Well, I will tell you why. Or actually, the Bible tells you why. Oh, then I go to my bad. And Haman told his wife, Zeresh, and all his friends everything that had happened to him. Man went home and just had a pity party. Like, you won't believe my day, what had happened to me. What happened this time, Haman? Then his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but he will surely fall before him. You will surely fall before him. Now, ladies, I think it's very wise for when you get married for your husband to communicate some of the things that goes on in his life, right? Some of his work life as well. Men, I think it's very wise for you to communicate and for your wife to communicate with you some of the things that are going on in your work life, especially when you decide to give $190 million away to kill off a people group. You know, like I'm sure people have heard about this law. I'm just saying. Even if you're a billionaire, it's still important. Just it's for tax purposes, you know? Like, okay, cool, genocide. I want to make sure I write that one off. But for some reason, Haman's wife didn't know that Haman was the one who had issued this law and was funding this campaign to kill off all the Jews. Y'all, it's been going on for a year. Almost a year. We're like at the very last couple days of it. But almost for a year. And how on earth does she not know that? Obviously, he didn't tell her. And how does she respond to when Haman comes in crying about Mordecai? He's like, well, hey, look, Haman, hopefully he's not one of them Jewish folks because it's not going to work out well for you. I would pay to see Haman's face in that moment right there. I would pay to see that. Because was Mordecai a Jewish man? Yeah. Yes, he was. Yes, he was. And also, it's the statement that, hey, you're not going to overcome him because he's Jewish. Well, this is one guy. What happens when you try and kill off all of them? Oh. Mordecai's put himself in a situation. But why do you think that, not Mordecai, sorry, Haman. Why do you think Haman, his wife, would say this? And the wise men as well. It's not just one person saying it, but it's a group of people. It's a collective group of people saying, you know what? If he's Jewish, you probably shouldn't mess with him because you're not going to come out well in the end of this. Why would that be the case? Because God had Mordecai's back. The Persian nation, by this time, had basically supplanted or taken place of the Babylonian nation. So we would know that, okay, you know what? They've seen some of the things that God has done through the Babylonian kings for the Israelites. They've heard the war stories of this small ragtag people group who doesn't really have even a strong army that comes in and basically just decimates people. They would have known that, okay, this God, this mighty God of the Israelites, he takes care of his people. He's faithful to his people. He has their back. And the thing is, right here, when you mess with one of these God's people, it usually doesn't end well for you. Mordecai was one man. But what happens when, I don't know, let's say a guy named Haman comes in and tries to get rid of all God's people? You think it's going to go over well for him? Probably not. Probably not. We'll find out about that later on, more about what happens. And when I say later on, next week. So you just have to come back. Sorry. But I look at this and I'm just like, you know, what did Mordecai do that makes you say, okay, God had his back? Like, how could you know that, okay, God has his back? Because there are so many people, like even Christians today, who they get in situations and God says, interesting. Now, God is always faithful to his people, but there are moments where God says, yeah, I didn't condone this. I didn't want you to go down this path. You decided to walk down this by yourself without me. What are you doing? But there are always those moments also where those who are faithful to God's promise, those who truly are believers of God, say, God, I'm going to walk in full obedience to who you are. I'm going to trust you. I'm going to let the fact that you've got my back dictate my lifestyle and let me be bold. And Mordecai did something that was very odd for a Jewish man to do. He saved a foreign king. Think about this. Mordecai overheard a plot to assassinate King Xerxes, the king who basically had forced his niece, or you call it daughter, niece, he raised her, his niece, to get married to him. The person who's basically in charge of all the Israelites, the person who has the power to basically say they are free or they're captives. Mordecai had a choice. He could have just simply said, you know what? I'm going to just play it quiet like I didn't hear a thing. Like I didn't hear a thing. And I'm going to just let however things fall that way. And if Xerxes dies, God's will. And if Xerxes doesn't die, maybe God's will. But instead, Mordecai says, what's the right thing to do? Because God does say also the people in power over you are there for a reason. Mordecai notifies the officials of the assassination plot. Instead of trying to save his own skin or trying to save his people, he simply says, I'm going to do the right thing. But how many of us, and let's be honest, would say, okay, you know what? I don't know, President Trump. Some people don't like our current president right now. And if somebody's bashing the president or an elected official, how many of us would stand up and say, you know what, that person's there for a reason? So instead of bashing this person, why don't you pray for them, that God would actually intervene in their lives and they would start to have an unveiled mindset and they'd realize what they're doing may or may not be wrong. And they'd have a kingdom vision. Yeah, we wouldn't do that because we want to bash people all the time because we feel like, we have the right to do these things. But when we stand on God's word and stand on God's promises, and understand he's got our back, our lifestyle changes. Our desires change. And it just fascinates me that Mordecai did one little thing just because he's like, you know what, I'm going to do the right thing. And dividends came from it. Dividends came from it. What if Mordecai had, what if he hadn't said anything? And what if King Xerxes actually survived? And what if King Xerxes, when he couldn't sleep that one night, didn't come across Mordecai's name? And what if Mordecai was actually killed because Haman desired to kill this man? There's a lot of what ifs. And what if we actually just believe that God has a plan for people's lives and that God says, I'm going to take care of you? What if that's what we believed? What if we lived our lives that way? Think about it. How would you live your life if you knew that God had your back? Would you be bolder? Would you be more gracious, more considerate? Would you be kinder? Would you stop looking at certain things? Would you stop talking to certain people? What would you do with your life, with your interactions, with who you are if you understood that, the God of all creation, of all existence, says, I love you, I am pleased with you as a person, as a human being, I've got your back, but I want greatness for you, so walk with me. What if you said, you know what, trust the fact that I'm with you, that even if the entire world turns its back on you, I'm still here with you. Trust that I've already walked down the path before you, and I still walk beside you. How would you change your life? How would I change my life if I believed that God truly had my back? And see, what amazes me is I know so many people in this room, they don't believe God has their back. They don't believe that God knows what's best for them. They don't trust that God really cares about their lives. See, we say, it's easy for me to say this, and look, I'm a pastor, so I'm preaching to you guys, but I'm preaching to myself as well. If you look at my journal, I've been writing about this a lot recently. It's very easy for me to say that, you know what, God, I trust you with my eternity. Like if I die today, cool, I know where I'm going. But for me to trust you with my today and my tomorrow, my overmorrow, my next 5 years, my 10 years, to trust you with the plan of my life, God, is very hard. Because I wonder if God's trustworthy. I wonder if God's got my back. But then I have to recant. So I have to think back about, okay, when has God ever let me down? And I have to think really, really hard about it because I can't find in any instance where God's let me down. I can find on more than one occasion where I've actually let myself down and God has come through. Where God has put me in a position, he said, you know what, Akil, I'm going to bless you when you never would have deserved this blessing. Where I'm going to sustain you when you never would have actually deserved this. I'm going to help you in a way that you never could have seen it. God has got my back. And because God has got my back, it changes my lifestyle. It changes the way I live today. It'll change the way I live tomorrow. And hopefully 10 years from now, it'll change who I am and how I live 10 years from now. Because I understand that my existence isn't predicated on what I can do or who's got my back from the people that are around me. I understand that the God of all creation sees my yesterday, my today, and my forever, all at one time. And because he sees that, I can trust him because I know he's got my back. So I ask you again, who's got your back? Who's that one person in your life you say, you know what, ride or die. That's my friend. They're going to be there for me. And then I ask you this, what happens when that person is no longer around? I had a conversation with a mom recently, one of our students, or a couple of our students' mom, and she made a statement to me that really hit me, made me think. She's like, I'm always going to be there for my girls. And I had the thought, no, you're not. You're not. No, I didn't say that because it was text message. So I said it out loud, but I was texting. So it's great. Right? But I had the thought, I was like, how many people believe that they're always going to be there for their loved one? Or they're always going to have someone who's right there with them, who's maybe there today and then they could die tomorrow. People die all the time. People move, people get sick. I moved 6 hours from my family when I never thought I'd move to Florida. And where am I? I'm in Florida right now. You don't know where God's going to call you in your life. You don't know what God's going to do with your life. So why risk it? Why chance it putting your entire hope and faith in the person that's right next to you? When God says, look, I'll walk with you for eternity. if you just trust me. When God says, look, I've redeemed your soul. I've made you whole. I've made you new. I laid my life down. I paid the price because you know what? I said you're worth it. That's the whole reason you're here, is because God says you're worth it. So much so that he says, look, I'll have your back forever. That's one of Jesus' last words to his disciples. He says, look, I will be with you until the end of the age. So if we truly own and believe that as believers of Christ, how we live our lives? Would we be bold? Would we be bold in trusting who he is? Or will we continue to cower in fear because we're afraid how people look at us, what our teachers might say about us, what our friends might think about us, what this girl or guy might say, or what they might not think anymore about us because we're unwilling to just simply say, look, my God is worth this right here. Ladies and gentlemen, know that you're worth it because God says you're worth it. And because you're worth God's life on this earth, because he says you're worth it, he laid his life down on a cross. Live that way. Live and love people because there's a God who loved you first. And I guarantee you it'll change the entire outlook of your life. It'll change what you do. It'll change who you are. It'll change your perspective. And I guarantee you it'll change your hopes and your dreams and your desires. God will awaken in you a love and a passion and a strength that you never knew you had because you finally found the perfect power source for your soul. And that's the resurrected Savior, Jesus Christ.